The C-130J touched down hard on the makeshift landing strip, its landing gear absorbing the impact as Sarah fought to keep the aircraft centered on the narrow runway. Rocks and debris pinged against the fuselage as the propellers reversed thrust, bringing the massive aircraft to a stop just yards from the end of the usable ground. Engines to ground idle. Parking brake set, Lou called out, running through the landing checklist with practiced efficiency. Through the cockpit windows, Sarah could see tracer rounds streaking across the valley like deadly fireworks. The Special Operations team had set up a defensive perimeter around the landing zone, but enemy fire was coming from multiple directions in the surrounding mountains. Angel-01, Bravo 7. We're moving the wounded to your aircraft now. Keep those engines running. This place is getting hot fast. Sarah left the engines at flight idle, ready for immediate takeoff. The C-130J's 4 turboprop engines provided the reliability she needed, but at this altitude, every bit of power would be crucial for their departure. Sergeant Gonzalez had the approach to Bagram Air Base was unlike any Sarah had flown before. Emergency vehicles lined both sides of the runway, their red and blue lights creating a colorful corridor leading to safety. The control tower had cleared all other traffic, giving Angel-01 priority handling for the medical emergency. Angel-01, Bagram Tower. You're cleared to land runway 09, winds calm. Emergency vehicles are standing by, and medical personnel are positioned at taxiway Alpha for immediate patient transfer. Sarah acknowledged the clearance while monitoring her hydraulic pressure gauge. The fluid level was now critically low, and she could feel slight changes in the aircraft's control response. The C-130J's backup systems were functioning normally, but landing with degraded hydraulics required extra precision and planning. "Tommy, give me flaps approach and landing gear down," she called to her co-pilot. "Flaps approach, landing gear down and locked," Lou responded, watching the hydraulic pressure carefully as the aircraft systems operated. Pressure is holding steady at minimum acceptable levels. Through the cargo bay intercom, Sergeant Gonzalez provided a medical update. Critical patient is hanging in there, but his blood pressure is dropping again. The trauma team needs to see him immediately after we land. Sarah lined up with the runway center line, making small corrections to account for the aircraft's slightly sluggish control response. The C-130J had been designed to handle battle damage, and even with reduced hydraulic pressure, it remained controllable and safe. 100 feet above touchdown, Lou called out, providing altitude updates as they descended toward the runway. The aircraft touched down smoothly on the concrete runway, and Sarah applied wheel brakes carefully to avoid overloading the weakened hydraulic system. The C-130J rolled out normally, slowing to taxi speed as they approached the designated parking area. Angel-01 is safely on deck at Bagram, she radioed to the tower. Request immediate ground power and medical team to aircraft. Before the aircraft had even come to a complete stop, medical personnel were running toward the cargo ramp. Sarah could see a team of doctors and nurses in surgical scrubs, along with medics pushing a wheeled stretcher equipped with advanced life support equipment. Engines to ground idle, parking brakes set, she announced, completing the landing checklist. "Tommy, shut down the auxiliary power unit and get the ground power connected as soon as possible." Sergeant Gonzalez had already lowered the cargo ramp, and the trauma team was boarding the aircraft before the engines had completely spooled down. Sarah could hear urgent medical conversations from the cargo bay as the doctors began their initial assessment of the critical patient. Dr. Martinez, the trauma surgeon she'd spoken with by radio, appeared at the cockpit door. He was a slight man with graying hair and the calm confidence that came from years of dealing with life and death emergencies. "Captain Shun, I'm Dr. Martinez. Your loadmaster did an excellent job maintaining this patient during flight. We're taking him directly to surgery. You may have saved his life by getting him here as quickly as you did." Sarah felt a wave of relief and exhaustion wash over her simultaneously. The mission was complete, the wounded were in good hands, and her aircraft was safely on the ground. But as she began shutting down the engines and completing post-flight procedures, she was already thinking about the lessons learned and improvements that could be made. How long will he be in surgery? She asked Dr. Martinez. Several hours, at least. He's got significant internal injuries, but he's young and strong. The fact that you got him here alive gives him a fighting chance. Through the cargo bay, Sarah could see the medical team carefully transferring the critical patient to their stretcher. Corporal Martinez, the walking wounded soldier, was also being escorted to the medical facility for treatment of his shoulder injury. Master Sergeant Williams, the Special Operations Team leader, appeared at the aircraft as the medical teams departed. His uniform was still dirty from the mountain operation, and his face showed the exhaustion that came with hours of combat. Captain Shin, I wanted to thank you personally before you leave. What you did today, flying into that landing zone in those conditions, that took real courage. My boys won't forget it. Sarah climbed down from the cockpit and shook Williams's hand. Master Sergeant, that's what we're here for. Your team held that perimeter under fire so we could get in and out safely. We're all part of the same mission. As the immediate post-flight activities wound down, Sarah found herself standing beside her aircraft, looking at the battle damage from the enemy gunfire. Several bullet holes punctured the fuselage and wings, and hydraulic fluid had leaked onto the concrete beneath the aircraft. Maintenance crews were already arriving to begin assessment and repairs, but Sarah knew the C-130J would be grounded for several days while technicians fixed the damage and replaced critical components. Lou and Gonzalez joined her beside the aircraft, all three crew members sharing the quiet satisfaction that came with completing a difficult mission successfully. They'd faced challenging weather, hostile enemy fire, and critical time pressures, but they brought their wounded passengers home safely. Captain, the tower wants to know our aircraft status for scheduling purposes, Lou reported, holding a clipboard with post-flight paperwork. What should I tell them about our next mission? Tell them Angel-01 is temporarily out of service for battle damage repairs, but the crew is ready for duty as soon as we get another aircraft, Sarah replied. As the maintenance crews began their detailed inspection of the aircraft, Sarah's radio crackled with an incoming message. Angel-01, this is Ramstein Operations. Major Torres wants to speak with you immediately upon your return. Congratulations on a successful mission. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. She could imagine the conversation that would take place when she returned to Germany. A thorough debrief of the mission, lessons learned, and probably some recognition for her crew's performance. But, more importantly, she knew she'd proven something to herself and to her squadron mates. The mission hadn't been about proving her worth as a pilot or showing up the people who'd questioned her readiness. It had been about doing the job she'd trained for, using her skills to save lives when it mattered most. The transport flight back to Ramstein was routine and uneventful, giving Sarah time to complete her mission reports and reflect on the day's events. The crew flew in a different C-130J, leaving their battle-damaged aircraft at Bugram for repairs. 12 hours after departing Germany on an emergency medical mission, they touched down at Ramstein Air Base under clear European skies. Sarah felt like a different person than the pilot who'd sat in the back row of the briefing room that morning, listening to jokes about her call sign. Major Torres was waiting for them at the aircraft when they arrived, along with several other squadron members who'd heard about the successful mission through military communication networks. Chun, excellent work today, Torres said, shaking her hand as she climbed down from the cockpit. I've already received preliminary reports from Bugram, and it sounds like you and your crew performed flawlessly under extremely challenging conditions. Lieutenant Morrison was among the group waiting for them, and Sarah noticed his expression was notably different from the condescending attitude he'd displayed that morning. When he approached her, his manner was respectful and genuinely admiring. Captain Chun, I owe you an apology. What I said in the briefing room this morning was out of line. You proved today that skill and courage matter more than seniority or experience. That was some exceptional flying. Sarah accepted the apology graciously, understanding that Morrison's earlier comments had come from concern rather than malice. Military aviation was a demanding profession where mistakes could be fatal, and everyone looked out for their colleagues' safety. Jake, we're all part of the same team. Today went well because everyone did their job, from the special ops team holding the perimeter to the medical staff at Bugram. Individual recognition isn't what matters, but Even as she downplayed her own role, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction knowing that she'd successfully completed one of the most challenging missions of her career. The approach to the mountain landing zone had pushed both aircraft and crew to their limits, and they'd performed flawlessly when lives depended on precision. Over the following weeks, news of the successful mission spread throughout the Air Force community. Sarah received official recognition for her flying skills, and her crew was commended for their professional performance under combat conditions. More importantly, word came back from the medical facilities that both wounded soldiers had made full recoveries. The critical patient had undergone 6 hours of surgery, but was expected to return to full duty within several months. Corporal Martinez's shoulder injury had been successfully treated, and he was already back with his unit. Master Sergeant Williams sent a personal message thanking the aircrew and informing them that the Special Operations mission had been completed successfully. The intelligence gathered during their mountain reconnaissance had contributed to a larger operation that significantly disrupted enemy activities in the region. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the mission, Sarah received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small wooden plaque with her call sign Angel-01 carved in elegant script, along with a handwritten note. Captain Chun, my name is Specialist David Chun, no relation, and I was the critical patient you evacuated from the mountains. The doctors tell me that getting me to surgery as quickly as you did probably saved my life. I wanted you to know that your call sign isn't a joke to me. You really were my guardian angel that day. I'm proud to share a name with someone like you. Thank you for bringing me home. Dave. Sarah kept the plaque on her desk in the Squadron Operations Center, where other pilots would see it and ask about the story behind it. She found that she no longer minded discussions about her call sign. In fact, she'd grown quite proud of it. 6 months later, Sarah was promoted to Major and selected for advanced pilot training on the C-17 Globemaster, one of the Air Force's most sophisticated transport aircraft. Her personnel file included commendations for exceptional airmanship and leadership under combat conditions. On her final day with the 86th Airlift Wing, the squadron held a farewell ceremony recognizing her contributions to military aviation and medical evacuation operations. Major Torres, now Lieutenant Colonel Torres, presented her with a squadron coin and spoke about the impact she'd had on unit morale and mission effectiveness. Major Chun exemplifies the best qualities of military aviation, Torres said to the assembled squadron members. She combines technical expertise with sound judgment, courage with humility, and individual skill with team leadership. Any unit would be fortunate to have her, and any aircrew would be proud to serve alongside her. As Sarah prepared to leave Ramstein for her new assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to military aviation. From childhood dreams of flying to the challenging years of flight training, from the initial struggles with squadron integration to the successful completion of combat missions, each step had prepared her for the responsibilities of military leadership. Lieutenant Morrison, now Captain Morrison, approached her after the ceremony. He'd become one of her closest friends in the squadron, and his earlier skepticism had evolved into genuine respect and admiration. Sarah, I've got to ask, do you ever regret choosing aviation as a career? All the challenges, the long hours, the time away from family. Sarah considered the question seriously before responding. Jake, every profession has its difficulties and sacrifices. But flying isn't just what I do for a living, it's who I am. When I'm in the cockpit of a transport aircraft, knowing that someone's life might depend on my skills and decisions, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong. She gestured toward the flight line, where several C-130J aircraft sat under the morning sun, ready for whatever missions might arise. These aircraft represent more than just technology or military capability. They're symbols of hope for people in desperate situations, soldiers who need evacuation, civilians requiring humanitarian assistance, supplies for remote outposts. Being part of that mission gives meaning to everything else. Captain Morrison nodded, understanding the deeper significance of their profession. Well, wherever the Air Force sends you next, they're getting one hell of a pilot. The students in your new training squadron are going to learn from the best. As Sarah drove away from Ramstein Air Base for the last time, she passed the runway where Angel Angel-01 had taken off 6 months earlier on an emergency medical mission. The memory of that flight remained vivid. The challenging weather, the hostile landing zone, the pressure of time-critical medical evacuation. But, more than the technical aspects of the mission, she remembered the moment when she'd realized that all the doubts and questions about her readiness had been irrelevant. When lives were on the line and difficult decisions had to be made, her training, skill, and judgment had proven sufficient for the challenge. Her new assignment would bring new challenges and opportunities for growth. As a senior pilot and instructor, she would have the chance to share her experience with the next generation of military aviators, helping them develop the skills and confidence needed for combat operations. The call sign Angel-01 would follow her throughout her career, no longer as a source of embarrassment, but as a symbol of the mission she'd dedicated her life to serving. In a profession where precision and courage were daily requirements, she'd found her place and proven her worth through action rather than words. Years later, when asked about the most important mission of her career, Major Chin would always return to that snowy morning in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Not because of the technical challenge or the recognition that followed, but because of a young soldier who'd lived to see another day because someone was willing to answer when the tower called. Angel-01, you're cleared for takeoff. In military aviation, clearance from the tower meant more than just permission to fly. It meant trust in the pilot's ability to complete the mission safely and successfully. For Sarah, earning that trust and living up to it had been worth every challenge along the way. The laughter that had once accompanied her call sign had been replaced by respect, but, more importantly, she'd learned that the opinions of others mattered far less than the knowledge that she could perform when it counted. Angel-01 had answered the call, and that made all the difference. That already lowered the aircraft's rear ramp, and Sarah could see armed soldiers running toward them through the swirling snow and dust kicked up by the propellers. The first figure to reach the aircraft was a bearded special operations medic carrying one end of a stretcher. "We've got a Class Alpha trauma here," he shouted over the engine noise. Multiple gunshot wounds to the torso, significant blood loss. Vitals are weak, but stable. The wounded soldier on the stretcher looked impossibly young, probably not even 20 years old. His face was pale beneath the camouflage face paint, and Sarah could see medical equipment attached to his uniform, for lines, pressure bandages, and a field expedient chest tube that had probably saved his life. Behind the first stretcher came another soldier, this one walking but supported by two teammates. His left arm was in an improvised sling, and blood soaked through the bandages wrapped around his shoulder. "This is Corporal Martinez," one of the special operations soldiers explained to Gonzalez. "Shrapnel wound to the shoulder, but he'll make the trip okay." As the wounded were loaded into the aircraft, Sarah monitored her instruments and radio frequencies. The tactical frequency was alive with reports of enemy movement, and she could hear the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds exploding somewhere nearby. "Angel-01, this is Overlord." A new voice cut through the radio chatter. "Be advised, we have multiple enemy vehicles approaching your location from the south. Estimate 10 minutes until they reach the perimeter." Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. 10 minutes was a long time to remain on the ground in hostile territory, especially with enemy reinforcements approaching. But the medical team was still working to stabilize the critical patient for flight. "How much longer do you need back there?" she called to Gonzalez over the intercom. "Give me 2 more minutes, Captain. His blood pressure is dropping, and I need to get another force started before we take off." Through her side window, Sarah could see the special operations team leader approaching the cockpit. He was a compact man with intelligent eyes and the calm demeanor that came with years of combat experience. When he reached the cockpit window, Sarah opened it to hear him over the engine noise. "Captain, I'm Master Sergeant Williams, team leader for Bravo 7. How long before you can get airborne?" 2 minutes to finish medical preparations, then immediate departure." "What's the tactical situation?" "We've been fighting these guys for 6 hours, and they're not giving up easy. My boys estimate 30 to 40 enemy fighters in the immediate area, plus those reinforcements heading our way. The good news is we've got close air support inbound. A couple of A-10s should be here in about 15 minutes. Sarah nodded, calculating times in her head. 15 minutes was too long to wait. They needed to be airborne and climbing away from the mountains before enemy reinforcements arrived. We'll be gone in 3 minutes, Master Sergeant. Make sure your people are clear of the aircraft. Williams gripped the window frame and leaned closer. Ma'am, I just want to say thank you for coming to get our guys. A lot of pilots wouldn't have attempted this approach in these conditions. Before Sarah could respond, a sharp crack echoed across the valley, followed immediately by the distinctive whistle of a bullet passing close to the aircraft. Someone was taking aimed shots at the C-130J from the surrounding ridgelines. Sniper fire, Williams shouted, dropping to the ground beside the aircraft. They're trying to disable your engines. Sarah could hear more rifle shots, and several rounds pinged off the aircraft's armored belly. The C-130J was built to take damage, but a lucky shot to an engine or critical flight control could trap them on the ground indefinitely. Gonzalez, we need to go now, she called over the intercom. 30 more seconds, Captain. I'm almost done with this for. More gunfire erupted around the aircraft, and Sarah could see muzzle flashes from at least 3 different positions in the rocks above the landing zone. The Special Operations team was returning fire, but they were outnumbered and running low on ammunition after hours of fighting. Tommy, engine parameters look good for takeoff. Calculate our performance one more time. I want to know exactly how much runway we need. Lou was already working with his charts and calculator. At our current weight and density altitude, we'll need every foot of available runway. There's no margin for error, Captain. Through the rear cargo door, Sarah could see Sergeant Gonzalez finishing her medical preparations. The critical patient was now connected to portable oxygen and cardiac monitoring equipment, while Corporal Martinez was secured in a crew seat with his injured arm properly immobilized. Medical team is ready for departure, Gonzalez reported. Patient is stable for transport, but we need to get him to a surgical facility as quickly as possible. Master Sergeant Williams appeared at the cockpit window again, his face grim with urgency. Captain, enemy reinforcements are moving faster than we expected. We've got vehicles approaching from 2 directions now. Estimate 5 minutes before they're in effective weapons range. Sarah made her decision. Everyone clear the aircraft. We're departing immediately. The Special Operations team sprinted away from the C-130J, taking cover behind the rocks that lined the improvised runway. Sarah pushed the throttles forward, feeling the 4 turboprop engines respond with a surge of power that vibrated through the airframe. Before takeoff, checklist complete, Lou reported. All systems green, we're ready to go. The aircraft began rolling down the rough landing strip, gathering speed slowly in the thin mountain air. Sarah kept the nose wheel firmly on the ground, building as much airspeed as possible before attempting to lift off. Halfway down the runway, enemy fire intensified dramatically. Someone had a heavy machine gun positioned to rake the length of the landing zone, and Sarah could hear bullets striking the aircraft's fuselage and wings. Taking hits, Lou reported calmly. No apparent damage to flight controls or engines. Sarah continued the takeoff roll, trusting in the C-130J's legendary toughness. The aircraft had been designed to operate in hostile environments, and its critical systems were protected by armor and redundancy. At rotation speed, she pulled back gently on the controls, feeling the aircraft lift off the rocky ground. But instead of climbing normally, the C-130J struggled to gain altitude in the thin air, mushing through the air barely above stall speed. Come on, girl, Sarah whispered to her aircraft, willing it to climb faster. Enemy tracers streaked past the cockpit windows as they passed over the defensive perimeter. The Special Operations team was laying down suppressive fire, but several enemy fighters had positioned themselves along the aircraft's departure path. At 50 feet above the ground, climbing at less than 100 feet per minute, the C-130J was an easy target for anyone with a rifle. Sarah could hear more impacts on the aircraft, and warning lights began illuminating on her instrument panel. We've got a hydraulic leak in the number 2 system, Lou reported, scanning the warning lights. Still have full control, but we're losing fluid pressure. Sarah focused on flying the aircraft, keeping it in the narrow valley between mountain peaks while gradually gaining altitude. The performance was marginal at best. They were right at the edge of the flight envelope, with no room for error or emergency maneuvering. Angel-01, this is Overlord. We show you airborne and departing the target area. Be advised, we have reports of possible shoulder-fired missiles in your vicinity. The warning came just as Sarah spotted a smoke trail rising from a ridgeline ahead. Someone had fired a surface-to-air missile at the departing aircraft, and the heat-seeking warhead was tracking toward their engines. Missile launch, Lou called out. Heat signature, bearing 2 o'clock, approximately 2 miles. Sarah pushed the aircraft into a diving turn, trading precious altitude for speed and maneuverability. The C-130J wasn't built for aerobatic flight, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Deploying flares, Gonzalez announced from the cargo bay, where she was operating the aircraft's defensive systems. Bright magnesium flares shot out from the aircraft, creating false heat sources designed to confuse the missile's guidance system. Sarah continued the evasive maneuver, diving toward the valley floor while turning away from the missile. The warhead detonated somewhere behind them, close enough to rock the aircraft with its blast wave, but far enough away to avoid serious damage. Sarah leveled the wings and began climbing again, every foot of altitude taking them further from the deadly mountain peaks. Missile defeated, Lou reported with obvious relief. All engines still running, flight controls responding normally. As they climbed through 500 feet above the valley floor, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe normally again. The immediate danger had passed, but they still had a long flight ahead with wounded passengers who needed immediate medical attention. Angel-01, this is Bagram Tower. We have you on radar, departing target area. What's your status and destination? Bagram Tower, Angel-01. We have 2 wounded personnel on board, 1 critical. Request priority handling and immediate medical support upon arrival. Roger, Angel-01. Medical personnel are standing by. You're cleared direct to Bagram. Maintain flight level 150. Weather at Bagram is clear, winds light, and variable. Sarah settled in for the long flight back to safety, but her mind was already racing ahead to the challenges that awaited. The hydraulic system was still leaking fluid, and several other warning lights indicated minor battle damage that would need attention. More importantly, the critical patient in the cargo bay was fighting for his life, and every minute counted. Sergeant Gonzalez was doing everything possible to keep him stable, but he needed surgery soon. How's our patient doing back there? Sarah asked over the intercom. Vital signs are holding steady, but just barely, Gonzalez replied. His blood pressure is marginal, and I'm concerned about internal bleeding. We need to get him to a trauma center as quickly as possible. Sarah pushed the throttles forward slightly, trading fuel consumption for speed. The C-130J responded with a modest increase in airspeed, but she was already running the engines at maximum continuous power. Tommy, what's our estimated time of arrival at Bagram? Lou checked his navigation display and fuel gauges. 1 hour and 20 minutes at current speed. We've got adequate fuel reserves, but not much to spare for delays or diversions. As they flew southwest toward Afghanistan's largest airbase, Sarah reflected on the mission so far. The approach and landing had gone better than expected, despite the challenging conditions and enemy fire. The takeoff had been marginal but successful, and they'd successfully evaded the surface-to-air missile. But the mission wasn't complete until they delivered their passengers safely to medical care. In the cargo bay, a young soldier's life hung in the balance, dependent on her flying skills and her crew's medical expertise. The radio crackled with routine air traffic control chatter, a welcome change from the tactical frequencies filled with reports of combat and casualties. Sarah monitored the routine communications while keeping one eye on her engine instruments and hydraulic pressure gauges. 30 minutes into the flight back to Bagram, Gonzalez's voice came over the intercom with urgency. Captain, I need you to contact medical control immediately. Our critical patient is showing signs of shock, and his vital signs are deteriorating rapidly. Sarah switched to the medical frequency and keyed her microphone. Bagram Medical, Angel-01. We have a critical trauma patient experiencing shock symptoms. Request immediate medical consultation. Angel-01, Bagram Medical. Stand by for trauma surgeon. A new voice came on the radio, calm and professional. Angel-01. This is Dr. Martinez at Bagram Trauma Center. What's the current condition of your patient? Sergeant Gonzalez took over the radio communication, providing detailed medical information about the wounded soldier's condition, treatments administered, and current vital signs. Sarah listened with growing concern as the doctor provided additional treatment recommendations and emphasized the need for immediate surgery upon arrival. Angel-01. Based on what I'm hearing, this patient needs to be in surgery within the next 30 minutes, Dr. Martinez concluded. We'll have a trauma team standing by at the aircraft when you arrive. Sarah calculated times in her head. They were still 45 minutes from Bagram at current speed, which would put them well beyond the doctor's 30-minute timeline. She had to make a decision that balanced aircraft safety with patient care. Tommy, what happens if I increase power to emergency settings? Lou consulted his performance charts again. We can pick up maybe 20 knots of airspeed, but we'll be operating the engines beyond normal limits. With the battle damage we've taken, there's some risk of additional failures. Sarah weighed the options. Operating the engines beyond normal limits could result in mechanical failure, potentially putting the entire aircraft and all its occupants at risk. But without increased speed, the critical patient might not survive the flight to medical care. The decision crystallized in her mind with absolute clarity. Emergency power, Tommy. This soldier didn't survive 6 hours of combat just to die in the back of my airplane. Lou advanced the throttles to emergency power settings, and Sarah felt the C-130J surge forward with renewed speed. The engine instruments moved into the red zones, indicating operation beyond normal limits, but all 4 power plants continued running smoothly. Bagram Medical, Angel-01. We're increasing speed for immediate arrival. Estimate 25 minutes to touchdown. Roger, Angel-01. Trauma team will be standing by. As the aircraft raced across the Afghan landscape at maximum speed, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation in the briefing room that morning. Lieutenant Morrison and the other pilots had questioned whether she was ready for a mission like this, whether someone with more experience should have taken the flight. Now, with a young soldier's life depending on her decisions and flying skills, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd dreamed about, and why she'd fought so hard to earn her place as a military pilot. The aircraft shuddered slightly as they pushed through turbulence at their increased speed, but the engines continued to deliver the power she needed. Warning lights continued to glow on the instrument panel, reminders of the battle damage they'd sustained during the departure from the mountain landing zone. Hydraulic pressure is continuing to drop slowly, Lou reported. Still within acceptable limits, but we'll want to get this bird on the ground sooner rather than later. Sarah acknowledged the report while maintaining her focus on navigation and aircraft performance. The C-130J was proving its reputation for toughness, continuing to fly reliably despite the damage from enemy gunfire. In the cargo bay, Sergeant Gonzalez worked steadily to maintain the critical patient's condition, monitoring vital signs, and adjusting treatments based on the medical consultation with the trauma surgeon. The second patient, Corporal Martinez, was stable and conscious, occasionally offering quiet words of encouragement to his fellow soldier. As they approached the final 30 minutes of flight time, Sarah began preparing for arrival at Bagram. The air base was one of the busiest in Afghanistan, with constant traffic from military transports, fighter aircraft, and civilian contractors supporting the war effort. Bagram approach. Angel-01 with priority medical emergency, requesting immediate clearance for landing. Angel-01, Bagram approach. You're cleared direct to final approach, runway 09. Emergency vehicles are standing by, and medical personnel are positioned near the runway. Sarah could see Bagram Air Base ahead, its runways and facilities sprawling across the Afghan countryside like a small city. After the hostile mountains and enemy fire, the sight of the controlled airspace and safety of the air base was profoundly reassuring. But the mission wasn't over yet. She still had to land the damaged aircraft safely and get her passengers to the medical team as quickly as possible. The hydraulic system was still leaking fluid, and the engines had been running at maximum power for nearly an hour. Final approach checklist, she called to Lou. beginning the familiar routine that would bring them safely to the ground and complete their mission. The morning briefing room at Ramstein Air Base buzzed with the usual mix of coffee, steam, and nervous energy. Captain Sarah Chun sat in the back row, her flight suit crisp and her notebook open, but she could feel the sideways glances from her squadron mates. At 26, she was the youngest pilot in the 86th Airlift Wing, and her call sign Angel-01 had become something of a joke among the other aviators. Sounds like something from a kid's cartoon, Lieutenant Jake Morrison had snorted when she'd first been assigned the designation 6 months ago. What's next? Rainbow Dash and Unicorn Squadron. The laughter that followed had stung more than Sarah cared to admit. She understood why Command had given her the call sign. Her specialty was medical evacuation flights, and Angel seemed fitting for someone who carried wounded soldiers to safety. But, to her peers, it sounded soft, feminine, almost silly compared to call signs like Viper, Thunderbolt, or Reaper. Major William Torres, the squadron commander, stepped to the front of the briefing room. His weathered face carried the weight of 23 years in the Air Force, and when he spoke, everyone listened. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a developing situation in the Hindu Kush Mountains of Afghanistan. A special operations team conducting reconnaissance has encountered heavy resistance. 2 wounded, 1 critical. Sarah's pen stopped moving across her notepad. Medical evacuations were her bread and butter, but something in the major's tone suggested this wouldn't be routine. The landing zone is at 11,000 feet altitude, surrounded by hostile terrain. Weather conditions are marginal at best. Visibility less than half a mile, crosswinds gusting up to 40 knots, and a storm system moving in fast. The wounded soldier won't survive transport to a lower altitude landing zone. The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah could feel her heart rate increasing, not from fear, but from the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with challenging flights. I need a volunteer crew for immediate departure. This is strictly voluntary. No one will think less of anyone who doesn't want to take this mission. Several hands went up around the room, but Torres's eyes found Sarah immediately. Chun, you're our most experienced medevac pilot. What's your assessment? Sarah stood, feeling the weight of 40 pairs of eyes on her. Sir, the C-130J can handle the altitude and terrain. The weather will be challenging but manageable with proper instrument approach. My crew and I can be airborne in 20 minutes. Hold on there, Angel. Lieutenant Morrison interrupted, using her call sign with obvious condescension. Maybe we should let someone with more experience handle this one. No offense, but this isn't exactly a milk run to transport supplies. Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks, but she kept her voice level. I've logged over 800 hours in combat zones, including 47 medevac missions. My crew has never missed an extraction. But have you flown in conditions like these? Pressed Captain Rodriguez, another pilot she'd trained with at flight school. This isn't about proving something, Chun. Lives are on the line. Major Torres raised his hand for silence. Chin's record speaks for itself. If she says she can do it, I trust her judgment. But I want to be absolutely clear about what we're facing here. He activated the large screen at the front of the room, displaying a topographical map of the region. Red markers indicated known enemy positions, while the landing zone appeared as a tiny clearing surrounded by jagged mountain peaks. The Special Ops team is call sign Bravo 7. They're dug in here. He pointed to a spot on the map, approximately 2 clicks from the nearest suitable landing zone. The wounded will need to be carried to the aircraft under fire. Enemy forces have anti-aircraft capabilities, including shoulder-fired missiles and heavy machine guns positioned on the surrounding ridgelines. Sarah studied the map, her mind automatically calculating approach vectors, emergency escape routes, and fuel requirements. The mission would push both aircraft and crew to their limits, but it was doable. What's the timeline, sir? She asked. Bravo 7's medic estimates the critical patient has maybe 4 hours before we lose him. Flight time to target is 90 minutes, assuming optimal conditions. That gives us very little margin for error. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez, Sarah's loadmaster, stood up from her seat near the front. Ma'am, my medical training is current, and we've got the latest trauma equipment on board. If we can get to them, we can keep him stable for the return flight. Staff Sergeant Tommy Liu, her co-pilot, nodded his agreement. The bird's in perfect condition, Captain. Pre-flight is complete, and we've got full fuel plus reserves. Major Torres looked around the room once more. Anyone else want to volunteer for this mission? The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Sarah noticed several pilots studying their boots or suddenly finding their flight manuals intensely interesting. She wasn't surprised. The mission profile was genuinely dangerous, and everyone knew it. Very well, Torres concluded. Chun, your crew has the mission. I want constant radio contact, and if conditions deteriorate beyond acceptable limits, you scrub the mission immediately. That's an order. Understood, sir. As the briefing broke up, Sarah gathered her gear and headed for the door. She could hear whispered conversations behind her, catching fragments like, crazy to let her, and should be Viper taking this one. Lieutenant Morrison caught up with her in the hallway. Look, Chun, I wasn't trying to embarrass you back there. It's just, this mission could go bad real fast. Are you sure you're ready for something like this? Sarah turned to face him, her jaw set with determination. Jake, I've been ready since the day I earned my wings. But, thanks for the concern. She walked away before he could respond, but she could feel his eyes following her down the corridor. The hangar was a cathedral of aviation engineering, with her C-130J Hercules sitting under the bright work lights like a mechanical altar. Sarah loved this aircraft. It wasn't sleek or fast like the fighters, but it was reliable, capable, and perfectly suited for the kind of work that actually saved lives. Sergeant Gonzalez was already conducting her pre-flight inspection, checking medical equipment, and securing cargo straps. The back of the aircraft had been configured for medical transport, with stretchers for equipment and enough supplies to run a small field hospital. How's our patient load looking, Maria? Sarah asked, pulling on her flight helmet. We're set up for 4 stretchers if needed, but from the briefing it sounds like we'll have 1 critical and 1 walking wounded. I've got blood products, advanced airway management, and enough morphine to keep someone comfortable on a very bad day. Staff Sergeant Liu emerged from the cockpit, tablet in hand. Weather update just came in, Captain. Ceiling at the target area is dropping fast. We've got maybe a 2-hour window before it socks in completely. Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. Not fear, exactly, but the focused tension that came with high-stakes flying. What about alternate landing sites? Nearest suitable field is 40 minutes further out. If we can't get into the primary LZ, our wounded soldier probably won't make it to an alternate. She climbed into the cockpit and began her instrument checks, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar routine. Radio frequencies, navigation systems, flight controls. Everything had to be perfect when lives depended on precision. The tower controller's voice crackled through her headset. Angel-01. You're cleared for immediate departure, runway 07. Winds 240 at 15, gusting to 25. Weather advisory remains in effect for your route of flight. Angel-01 copies all. Ready for departure, Sarah responded. Her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. As the C-130J rolled down the runway, Sarah caught a glimpse of several pilots watching from the tower observation deck. She wondered if they were hoping to see her succeed or expecting to watch her fail. The aircraft lifted off smoothly, climbing into the gray European morning. Below, the German countryside spread out in neat patchworks of fields and forests, peaceful and orderly. In 90 minutes, she'd be flying over some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth, where good men were bleeding and enemy fighters were waiting. Ramstein Tower, Angel-01 is airborne and departing your airspace. Thanks for the help. Roger, Angel-01. Good hunting, and bring our boys home safe. The flight to Afghanistan passed in relative calm, with Sarah and Liu working through navigation updates and weather reports. The C-130J was a stable platform for long flights, and Sarah used the time to visualize the approach to the landing zone, mentally rehearsing emergency procedures and escape routes. 3 hours into the flight, they crossed into Afghan airspace. The landscape below transformed from European civilization to the raw, unforgiving beauty of Central Asian mountains. Snow-capped peaks jutted up like broken teeth, and Deep valleys carved by ancient rivers created a maze of canyons and ridgelines. Angel-01, this is Bagram Tower. We have your flight plan and current weather for target area. Visibility is down to 1/4 mile, ceiling at 200 feet AGL. Winds are variable at 20 to 35 knots. Recommend you consider alternate LZ. Sarah keyed her microphone. Bagram Tower, Angel-01. What's the current status of wounded personnel? Stand by, Angel-01. The pause stretched long enough for Sarah to complete another instrument check. When the controller returned, his voice was grim. Angel-01, Bravo 7 reports patient condition is deteriorating rapidly. They need immediate extraction or they're going to lose him. Sarah looked at Lou, who shrugged and pointed to their fuel gauge. They had enough gas for one approach, maybe two if they were lucky. What do you think, Tommy? I think we didn't come this far to turn around now. But it's your call, Captain. Through her headset, Sarah could hear radio chatter from the ground team. Bravo 7 was in heavy contact with enemy forces, and the sound of gunfire was clearly audible in their transmissions. Angel-01, this is Bravo 7. A voice cut through the static. We've got Angel down. Repeat, we have Angel down. Need immediate extraction for critical patient. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Here was a real Angel, a wounded soldier whose life hung in the balance, while she flew with a call sign that others considered a joke. Bravo 7, Angel-01 inbound your location. Give me a current situation report. Angel-01, we're taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Enemy has eyes on our LZ, but we can suppress them long enough for you to get in and out. Critical patient has lost consciousness and is experiencing cardiac irregularities. If we don't get him out in the next hour, we're going to lose him. Sarah could see the mountains ahead now, massive and forbidding, their peaks disappearing into low-hanging clouds. Weather conditions were exactly as bad as advertised, with visibility dropping rapidly as moisture from the storm system began to condense. Lou, start descent checklist. Maria, make sure everything's secured back there. We're going in. As the C-130J began its descent toward the Hindu Kush Mountains, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her during challenging flights. This was what she'd trained for, what she'd dreamed about since she was 8 years old and had first seen a military transport aircraft at an air show. The radio crackled again. Angel-01, be advised we have reports of possible surface-to-air missile activity in your target area. Enemy forces are actively trying to deny access to the LZ. Copy that, Sarah responded. Bravo 7, what's your assessment of enemy capabilities? Angel-01, they've got at least 2 heavy machine gun positions and multiple small arms. We can keep their heads down, but you're going to have to come in fast and low. The LZ is barely long enough for your aircraft, and there's no margin for error on approach or departure. Sarah studied her approach charts one more time. The landing zone was a narrow strip of relatively flat ground wedged between 2 ridgelines, at an altitude that would challenge both aircraft performance and crew endurance. Approach would require threading the needle between mountain peaks in near-zero visibility, while departure would mean climbing steeply with a full load of passengers and limited power. Tommy, what's our performance going to look like at this altitude and weight? Lou consulted his charts and calculator. We'll be right at the edge of the performance envelope, Captain. Landing distance will use 90% of available runway, and takeoff will require every inch we can get. If we have to go around, we probably won't get a second chance. Understood. Maria, how fast can you load patients once we're on the ground? Give me 3 minutes if they're ready at the aircraft when we arrive. 5 minutes if we need to do any stabilization first. Sarah nodded and keyed her radio. Bravo 7, Angel-01. We're starting our approach now. Have your wounded ready for immediate loading. We'll be on the ground for less than 5 minutes. Roger, Angel-01. We'll be ready. Thanks for coming to get us. As the C-130J descended into the clouds, visibility dropped to almost nothing. Sarah switched to full instrument flight, trusting her training and the aircraft's navigation systems to guide them safely through the maze of mountain peaks. The aircraft shook as they hit turbulence, and ice began forming on the windscreen. Approach radar contact lost, Lou reported. We're on our own for navigation. Sarah's hands moved steadily across the controls, making small adjustments to keep them on course. This was the kind of flying that separated good pilots from great ones. When technology reached its limits, and everything came down to skill, experience, and nerves. The altimeter unwound steadily as they descended, and Sarah could feel the thin air affecting the aircraft's performance. At 11,000 feet, the C-130J's engines were working harder to produce the same power, and control responses were slightly sluggish. 1 minute to touchdown, Lou called out. Sarah strained to see through the clouds and blowing snow. Visibility was down to mere yards, and she was flying purely on instruments. If their navigation was off by even a small amount, they could easily fly into a mountain without warning. Then, suddenly, the clouds parted just enough to reveal the landing zone ahead, a narrow strip of brown earth surrounded by towering peaks. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from the surrounding ridgelines, and the distinctive smoke trails of rocket-propelled grenades arcing across the valley. There it is, she said, lining up for final approach. Bravo 7, Angel-01 on final. Keep those bad guys busy for another 30 seconds. The response came back immediately, punctuated by the sound of automatic weapons fire. Roger, Angel-01. We've got you covered. LZ is clear for landing. As Sarah brought the C-130J down toward the narrow strip of earth that would either save lives or claim them, she could hear Major Torres's voice in her memory. Lives are on the line. Indeed they were. And everything she'd trained for had led to this moment.